Triggers are experiences with other people that cause us to feel sudden bursts of anger and defensiveness. It's when somebody or something pushes your buttons. And this is so that we can understand why some people irritate us and other people don't. This can help us with our relationships, as we can understand why we feel this way towards certain people, and we can get to know that it isn't actually the other person we're triggered by, it's our own shadow that causes the trigger. It's the behaviour that we dislike in others that we've got within us, albeit buried deep within our shadow, because perhaps we're ashamed of it, perhaps we dislike it, or we've been programmed to hide it. So I'm going to give you an example. Say there's somebody in your life who is really brash and loud, and they've got zero filter and they irritate the hell out of you. But your friends don't have a problem with them. Your friends are perfectly comfortable in the company of this person, but you are riled every time they're around you. And then you might start to feel guilty about the fact that you dislike them, particularly when other people seem to not have a problem. Maybe you feel bad because you're moaning about them all the time. But when you explore their behaviour and you turn it round onto yourself, you might discover that you have that behaviour within your shadow. Now, if you're feeling defensive as I'm saying this to you, and you've got somebody in mind who really irritates you and you think, there's no way I've got that in me, then you probably have. If you're feeling defensive and annoyed by the mere thought of it, then it's probably within you. Because if it wasn't, you'd feel nothing. Why do you think that you find certain people irritating but others don't? And the people that your friends and family like and you get really angry around and you really dislike their behaviour? And vice versa. So triggers aren't when we just mildly dislike somebody or we don't vibe with them. Triggers are when there is a strong emotional reaction. This is usually anger or disgust or hatred. So you might still be feeling defensive hearing this, but if you look at it this way, if you were brought up to be very quiet, very gentle, very considerate of other people, your parents taught you to be nice and quiet so you didn't irritate people. So you buried that loud, brash part of you that many children have because your parents didn't want you to behave like that. So you might have grown up with that part of you hidden and buried. And then somebody else comes along as an adult, totally loud, brash, irritating. They let whatever's in their head come straight out of their mouth. They're just spontaneous and it really irritates you. That's because you strongly deny that part of you. So you may not openly display that sort of behaviour. That's what makes you so defensive, because you're adamant that you don't have that sort of personality. But you did have that sort of behaviour once, and for some reason it got buried. And that's what causes the trigger. That's what causes the irritation, the anger, the hate. So it isn't actually the other person's fault, and it isn't your fault. But recognising why this happens means we can have more understanding of why certain people irritate us, and perhaps we can be more forgiving towards them when we recognise this, and more forgiving towards ourselves when we understand where this anger or hatred comes from. Exploring our triggers can also reduce their impact because we understand them better when they happen. And we realise we're not hateful, horrible people just because we get cross with other people when they push our buttons. And we don't see the people who push our buttons as bad when we do this sort of work. We recognise they're just displaying a behaviour that we were taught to suppress. Then you can come to realise they're not so different to you. They may have just been given different programming by their parents and their society or their culture, and that's literally the only difference. If you were born into their family, you'd be loud and brash as well. So doing the work on triggers is quite enlightening, and it can really help with our relationships, particularly the ones that we find the most difficult.